Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It is Rinks, and today we're going to talk DC. To be honest, in my opinion, this feels like a long time coming because I'm a really big DC fan. I've been one for several years, and I wanted to start doing a series talking about DC mostly. What started my love for DC was actually playing Arkham Asylum when it first came out, and then that got me introduced into Batman and to the lore of Batman and to his mythos along with his villains. And then learning more about his mythos, then I started branching out to other DC characters when I started watching Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, and then that kind of branched out to other media of DC. All of these are great sources if you want to get started into the basics of DC. DC has a reputation of having good animated movies. There are ones like Mask of Phantasm, Crisis on 2 Earths, and Green Lantern First Flight. But my personal favorite of all of them is The Dark Knight Returns. There's so much with this movie that I wish I can talk about it, but I'm going to save that for another video. But this movie to me is the peak of DC animation, in my opinion at least. There's so much to go off of when you learn so much of Batman's stories and his mythos that it all makes sense that to me, this is Batman. I love that there were multiple stories, but they were still connected to each other, and it really tells the story of how Batman would have been treated like if he existed in the real world. Not to mention about how, I don't know how to say this, but like it was gruesome. It's gruesome because it needed to be, because Gotham is a dark place and the people who live in there, they need to be just as gruesome. So having said that, I really do highly recommend it of watching it. My appreciation for DC grew even more when I started watching the live action movies. Not only the new ones, but the old ones as well. The older movies gave me insight into how these characters were molded, as the new ones gave me a fresh perspective on them. After watching The Dark Knight Returns, I actually watched Man of Steel right after that. It was because I watched those two movies on the same day before I went to go watch BVS. And then ever since I watched that movie, that changed my perspective and how I look into comic books. The DCEU movies are wonderfully written, well, for the most part. Does anyone hate Justice League as much as I do? Don't worry, we will talk about that movie, but right now it's such a headache I don't even want to get into it. But going back on topic, there are many inspiring and heartfelt moments into the DCU combined with great imagery that really make it a great watching experience. And to me, that's what I want in anything, not just in movies, but in TV shows and in video games as well, even with music. I want variety, I want tones, and I think that's what anyone wants, is that they don't want to get the same thing over and over again. It's like eating the same food over and over. Yeah, it's good, but eventually it kind of loses its taste when you want to try something new. But if you keep an open mind, you'll be open for any experience. DC shows are just as compelling as the movies. I just finished watching Gotham and I'm a bit sad because it's over, because I fell in love with its characters and its mature take on the characters in the fictional city of Gotham. Having some horrific, menacing, and terrifying moments in the show, displaying that these characters would have become who they are even without Batman, because the city is what made them what they are. There is a new show that I started watching and it's called Doom Patrol. I'm going to be honest, this show was a bit much for me and I'm still in the process of watching it, but I still love the characters even though I hate them at the same time. And I guess that's really with anything with a show, is that you want to like them, but sometimes there are characters that even though they can be likable, you just want to hate them because of certain things that they've done. Doom Patrol is something different from what we haven't had, was that it has humor, but it doesn't overtake its humor, it doesn't overstay its welcome. And it has some good storytelling plots as well. And to me, that's what makes it a really good show, is that it tries something different but not too over the top, but still keeps its core in storytelling. It balances its humor and its story. But Jane, to me, was the best part of the show. There was just something about Jane where she had multiple personalities and she had this ongoing battle within herself and fighting her own past, but at the same time, she didn't want to control her feelings. She didn't want to control anything about herself or her personalities. She let them be. She was respecting them as a human being because she treated them like they exist. and they did the same thing with her. Also, there are other great DC shows such as Swamp Thing and Titans. Those are other good shows that I would recommend to go watch. One thing about DC is that they have, and I do stress this, they have a lot of comic books. And with that, they have a lot of stories to tell. One of my favorite stories is DC Metal, where they've introduced the Dark Knights. This comic is about different scenarios which Batman experienced individual horrific events that change who he is. He gives in to the dark temptation and therefore becomes bad. In each scenario, it shows what Batman could have become. He could have became evil. That relates to us of how whatever path we choose in life, it determines who we will become. Not to mention other stuff happens in the comic book, some awesome moments here and there. But really, my favorite part of the whole story was the introduction of the Dark Knights. Those are some of my favorite villains, and again, they're basically Batman, but it shows how dangerous Batman can be. I mean, he steals Flash's powers in one variation, he becomes a literal murder machine in one, and he becomes even worse than the Joker. That speaks volumes of how dangerous Batman could be. There's a reason why in the comics Superman said that he considered Batman the most dangerous person in the planet. And then there are other great stories to tell, such as Sinestro Corps Wars, The Blackest Night, Hush, and Death of the Family. All of these are great stories contributing to the long publication history of DC Comics. There is a plethora of characters in DC. There's so many heroes that a lot of them are considered my favorite. Batman is obviously my favorite character, but there's one character in particular I want to talk about today, and that's Jessica Cruz. Jessica Cruz is a Green Lantern that suffers from anxiety after a traumatic event in her life. Dealing with everyday life while having a mental illness can be very difficult and requires a lot of willpower. Even with her powers, Jessica still struggles with her anxiety but still pushes through. To me, I think she's very inspiring to the people who struggle with their mental health, and she definitely deserves much more love. And there are other great DC heroes that I really want to talk about and that are my favorite, like Mr. Miracle, Question, Huntress, and Wonder Woman. I really do love a lot of these heroes because they mean a lot to me. A lot of them kind of had a hand in helping me becoming a better person. That's really what it's all about, is that we look up to these heroes and they help us make us into a better person, or try to at least. If there's one thing that people have in common when talking about DC is that they have amazing villains. Most of them are complex. For example, Captain Cold. He mostly robs banks and wants to defeat Flash, but he has a moral code to not hurt any women or children. Sometimes the villains are justifiable, like Black Manta. He was a treasure hunter until Aquaman caused the death of his father, and because of this, he became dedicated into killing and ruining Aquaman's life. Also at times, they're sympathetic, like Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze only does what he does for his wife. His wife was inflicted with an incurable disease and he tried making one until his employer finds out he was using their money trying curing her. This caused a tragic scene where he turned into Mr. Freeze. And to me, that's one of my favorite stories, and anyone that is watching this, do watch Batman Beyond when Mr. Freeze returns. That scene is tragic and it makes you cry. A lot of the villains are surprisingly intelligent. For example, Bane. Bane grew up in a prison trying to survive by adapting and using his smarts. Then he was selected to test on a new experiment called Venom. He then used the venom to become stronger, and with his newfound strength, he used it to take over the prison where he was in. Now he wants to fight Batman in order to prove his strength. Lastly, DC villains are not only scary but menacing, like Scarecrow. Having grown up with an abusive grandmother who made him scared all the time, he killed her using the very thing she used against him. Ever since he was a boy, he has been fascinated with the idea of fear. Later in his life, he became a professor in a college and specializing in phobias. He experimented on his students with a fear toxin he came up with. Now he terrorizes Gotham and will stop at nothing until everyone knows that fear is everything that controls us. And that is just a few of the villains in DC. Each of them are very unique. While some will still have moral codes, others are driven by revenge and hate. Just to name a few villains, there are also Joker, Sinestro, Lex Luthor, Cheetah, and of course, Darkseid. These villains are very important because without a good villain, you can't have a good story. DC has a lot of great characters and stories that are amazing and at times relatable. DC is never afraid to try something new, and instead of pandering to its audience, it gives them something new to think about. There's always something intriguing, mysterious, and inspiring with each character and story. That is why I love DC, and I look forward to what the future holds for it. And that's it. We're done talking about DC. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite characters and stories from DC. Also, let me know of other topics from DC that you want me to cover, because this will become a new series called Talking DC. And I'm really excited to going forward with this idea because this is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and I'm finally getting to do it. I feel confident of doing it now. Well, let's start wrapping things up. Hit the notification bell to let you know when some more DC content comes out and other videos of mine that comes out as well. Also, like, subscribe, share the video, and also there will be links down below to follow me on Instagram and also Twitter, where most of my DC stuff is found in. And I also follow other DC creators and influencers, so I do recommend looking through and see who I follow. Until next time, my outlets, I'll catch you later.